Hi, and welcome to PIIE Insider Live. I'm Anjali Bhatt, Communications Manager and Research Fellow here at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I regularly say that the best part of my job is that I can just walk into the offices of some of the world's top economics experts and just ask them questions, and then they answer. So with PIIE Insider Live, you get to come with me to ask those questions and get those answers. Today, we're speaking to Han-koo Yeo, a PIIE Senior Fellow and South Korea's Trade Minister from 2021 to 2022. He's had a long career in trade, negotiating trade agreements and trade architecture, and was also the commercial attaché at the Korean embassy here in DC in the first Trump administration. So one could say he's seen a lot on the trade front. Quick housekeeping for our live audience. There will be time for questions at the end. So go ahead and submit those via the Q&A function. Don't use the raise hand thing, just the text Q&A box. And please make sure your name is visible and included with the question. So with that, hi, Han-koo. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start with a little story, actually, because it was all I was thinking about when I was preparing for this episode. So on December 3rd, you and I were part of the Peterson Institute delegation that was in Singapore for the Next Step conference. And so on that day after the conference, when a group of us had went out, for a post-conference beverage, the conversation at some point had turned towards law enforcement and, different law enforcement regimes in the US, in Singapore, in different European countries. And so I asked you, I was like, oh, what's it like in Korea? And you said something along the lines of, oh, it's not like the US, maybe not quite as strict as Singapore, but it is pretty serious. Right. And then 6 hours later, there was martial law. And all of the Peterson Institute emails were flying. So since then, tell us what's happened.
Yeah, I think that moment, I think it was a fake news, right? But I think what happened is that, the President Yoon was impeached in the National Assembly last December. And now this constitutional court is reviewing the impeachment case. And I think many news media in Korea right now sort of expect that the final decision may come out around March or April, a bit earlier than expected. So I think we have two scenarios. If this constitutional court determined that in favor of this impeachment, then Korea should have a new presidential election in 2 months. So around May or June time. And then if this impeachment is rejected, then President Yoon will be reinstated right away. So we have to see what happens.
And then he'll just be president again?
Yes. We cannot tell which case will be, but I think there's two scenarios.
Two scenarios. And so we'll have to see in the next few months still. Yeah. Okay, so given that, tell us about the domestic South Korean economy. How has this political turmoil affected, consumers, businesses, investment? How are they doing?
Yes, the Korean economy is facing headwinds on multiple fronts, especially on this domestic front. This prolonged political uncertainty is obviously taking a toll on the economy. Obviously it's negatively affecting the consumer confidence, and businesses cannot make investment decisions until more clarity on the scene in this the political and policy direction. So and also on the external aspect, Korea is a trading nation. It's the sixth largest exporting country in the world. And if you look at this trade to GDP ratio, it's almost 90%, one of the highest. So normally export drive this economic growth. And this year in 2025, with all these Trump 2.0, we don't have to, explain. And all this uncertainty, unpredictability surrounding global trading, system, it is expected that Korea's trade, export growth may just slow down to 1.5%. I mean, for example, last year, the export growth was 8.2%. So you can see how much it may slow down. And then, so reflecting all these internal, external factors, Bank of Korea recently forecast that 2025, this GDP growth forecast, just kind of they lowered to 1.6 or 7%, lower than 1.9%, which they forecast, a couple of months ago.
Okay, so not great. In the blog that you wrote a couple of weeks ago, one of the things you said about one of the headwinds facing the domestic Korean economy were semiconductors and the semiconductor industry.
Yes.
What's going on there?
Yeah, I think we need to put things into perspective when we truly understand, the semiconductor industry in Korea. It's a number one industry and account for about 20% of annual, export. And for the last, decade or so, Korea has really led the memory chip industry and the number one in the market share. But in non-memory chip, it's a cutting edge, the foundry model. Korea has been really kind of trailing, the Taiwan or, TSMC. And then if you look at this broader industry landscape, right now, this manufacturing base is being diversified into the Texas, Arizona, Kumamoto, Dresden, etc. And then, this breakthrough technology of AI is disrupting the whole industry. So I think there's a sense of sort of urgency and crisis in Korea. And so now this in the National Assembly, the special act on the semiconductor to enhance competitiveness is being discussed. But one really critical issue, controversial issue is the strict labor law. I mean, in Korea, there's a restriction of this 52, hour per week. It's a mandatory. But think about this R&D in semiconductor. It's ruthlessly, competitive, right? And you're those scientists, engineers in Silicon Valley, Taipei, Beijing, they can work as long as they want, on those hours they want. But there's a strict restriction. And, many people think that this really lowering the productivity in Korea. So I think the Korea should really look at this global, landscape and this really competitive, pressure. And then look at, that this law has to be passed as soon as possible.
So if this law was passed and then, Korean engineers could be more productive and focus more on R&D.
Yeah, so there's an exception. I mean, now this industry is trying to, get this exemption on this R&D.
So only specifically in the semiconductor industry.
Yeah, semiconductor and R&D sector.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it makes a reasonable sense.
Are they aiming for the higher end chips or the lower end or both?
I think, the higher end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll see how that goes. All right, why don't we zoom out a little and let's look at Korea's relationship with the US and with China. Like you said, it's a trading nation. How has the US-China confrontation affected Korea?
Yeah. Korea is really at a geopolitical fault line between United States and China. And for the last 20 years, the Korean economy has really benefited from this rapid economic growth of China. And so for the last 20 years, about a quarter of our total export went to China. But that pattern is changing, for the last few years. Right now, this Korea's export to China is decreasing to 19, 20% level. And Korea's export to the United States is increasing from normally 12, 13% level to 19, 20% level. So it's more, a lot of that diversification and de-risking is happening in Korea. So I think, this Trump 2.0 really needs to carefully look at what is happening, this shift in trade investment and also the supply chain happening in Korea, and then really not overdo this tariff to kill this momentum.
We'll definitely get to the tariffs in a minute.
Yeah.
But so the Korean companies that are investing less in China, are they moving to the US or are they also looking for other places?
You know, last year, Korea's investment in the US was 15 times, 15 times, you know, higher than Korea's investment into China. And then since Trump 1.0, Korean companies invested $160 billion and semiconductor, you know, batteries and it's automobiles as well. And when it comes to greenfield investment, just building factories, you know, from bottom up, Korea was number one in 2023 and 2024. So you see how these, you know, Korean companies are really pivoting towards this US, really strongly motivated by you know, CHIPS Act and then IRA, etc. So we have to see, you know, how we could maintain this momentum.
So there was the chip factory in Arizona was TSMC.
Mhm.
What are the Korean companies that are investing in sort of the higher tech parts of the US?
Actually, Samsung Electronics, they invested in the, you know, Texas, Austin, Texas, but now building this Taylor, Texas as well. And then the Hyundai, you know, automobile, they have a big, you know, factories in Alabama and Kia, the Georgia, and then many of these batteries scattered, you know, around Ohio and you know, Michigan and all these Midwest, you know, countries, the state.
You've been to a couple of these factories and stuff, right?
Yeah.
What's that like?
I think this is like really kind of futuristic. You know, many of them, you know, were kind of automated and the state-of-the-art facility. And then, for example, recently I visited Texas, in Austin, Texas, and they've been, you know, operating that, you know, the semiconductor manufacturing for decades. So a lot of those operations were localized already, and you know, kind of also raising these local, you know, engineers, and they kind of developed some cooperation program with the, you know, University of Texas and this local, you know, community college, etc. So I think, you know, they are really contributing to this local economy.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So, like you said, South Korean investment in the US is huge, and it's kind of all over the place. Does the US has a trade deficit with Korea, and does that matter?
Yeah, I think, you know, trade deficit right now is a, you know, buzzword these days, but I think that all trade deficit is not created equal. What I mean by that is that you have to really look at what's the composition of those trade deficit. If you look at Korea's case, you know, as I said, a lot of these Korean investment are pivoting towards the United States. And then if that happens, this export is kind of a link. I mean, in other words, when you build these factories in the US, you have to bring machinery, you know, intermediate goods, etc. Yes, of course, then why not the local sourcing? Yeah, they want to, but it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So for the, you know, the first few years, they have to, you know, continue to bring in those, you know, intermediate goods and input to this US manufacturing. And then they, you know, begin to localize and then develop this local ecosystem. So I think that last year, Korea's, you know, the U.S. trade deficit with Korea kind of peaked at $66 billion. But I think it's you have to really look at what compose those trade deficit, and I see this as more kind of temporary, you know, kind of phenomena.
What are the kind of things that the US exports to Korea?
You know, actually, Korea is sixth largest trading partner to United States, and Korea was largest importer of US LNG for the last 7-8 years. And then Koreans love US beef. I love US beef, and I mean, Korea is the largest, you know, export market for US beef.
Really?
I mean, you know, bigger than this 1.4 billion, you know, the Chinese market. So, you know, in that sense, for many of these U.S. energy as well as this agricultural product, Korea is a pretty big market for U.S.
Okay, so LNG and beef. Good to know. So let's get to the tariffs. So back in the first Trump administration, at the first round of Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs, you were at the Korean embassy here.
Right.
And at the same time as those Section 232 tariffs were announced, you were also in the middle of renegotiating the Korea-US trade agreement,
Yes.
Chorus. What was that like?
Unfortunately, I was in the room. And let me tell you a kind of interesting story. I still vividly remember the first day of my arrival as a commercial attaché. I was having dinner, and then all of a sudden, breaking news came out that President Trump will terminate Korea-US FTA. That was my day one, right?
What a day one.
And then it was during the time when North Korea, Kim Jong-un kept shooting this missile and testing nuclear weapons, etc. So it was really kind of tense moment in terms of the security and economy of this alliance. So I think, the two countries managed to kind of begin this renegotiation of porous FTA. But 2 months into this negotiation, another breaking news, came out that, this Section 232, steel tariff will imposed based on this national security concern. I thought it was on North Korea, not South Korea, allies.
That's the national security issue. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, but in the end, I think, two countries managed to combine this Korea-US FTA as well as this Section 232, steel, this quota negotiation. So Korea became like the first country to cut a deal with the Trump 1.0 through that sort of shock and awe moments. Yeah.
So the deal that you cut with the Trump administration that first time, explain how the quota system that you negotiated is different from just tariffs on Korean steel.
Yeah. During Trump 1.0, they used this quota system to exempt some of the countries from this 25% tariff. So at that time, Korea agreed to like this kind of 17% of the previous 3 years of average kind of export instead of this 25% tariff. And but what struck me for the Trump 2.0, this steel tariff, based on the 232, is that no exemption or no exclusion, in principle. I doubt, whether that could really hold, considering this industry reality, because some of the specialized this steel, you cannot source in the U.S. So a lot of the downstream industry need to import some of those specialized steel. So, but I think it really shows the current approach on this tariff and then possible revenue kind of, from this tariff. And, it really seems to be a hardline, from my perspective.
So some of the steel that steel-using economies need and that other steel plants can't make here in the U.S. Does Korea make some of that steel?
Yeah, Korea makes some of them. And so I think Japan and Australia and I think Canada maybe. So that's why I think these countries got exemption. And also
the first time around.
In the first time around. And then on some of the specialized, steel product got kind of, exclusion from this quota system as well. So I think we have to see. I think, you really have to, consider the industry reality.
So you said, the no exemptions and no exclusions is, is different from the first round.
Mm-hmm.
What else sort of is different about, well, a lot of things are different about the Trump administration's approach this time. But what are you seeing that's really different that has struck you from the first time?
I think another really striking thing is when I look back on this, the 4 years Trump 1.0, they used this tariff with limited purpose, strictly economic, purpose, steel and also the washing machine, etc. But now what we are, kind of witnessing is, the Trump 2.0 really aggressively using tariff for non-economic purpose. I mean, Panama, Canal, and the Greenland, and immigrant, the illegal immigration, etc. So, and also, I think during this time around, they tend to look at tariff as a source for revenue, which is not really, true. I mean, our Peterson, colleague, analyzed this, and then, so I think that is some of the kind of concerning aspect.
So now that tariffs are being used sort of as a threatening tool, a negotiation tool, how is that like received in other countries? Like how do your contacts in Korea sort of react to those threats / negotiation tactics?
Yeah, right now, I mean, realistically, United States has the largest, kind of a market, the biggest market, and then the only the superpower. So I think that sort of pressure could work, but obviously it may kind of bring some resentment from those countries. So I think you need to be really careful. It's not in the end. It's not just about trade, it's about alliance, it's about, kind of American soft power, around the world. And you don't want to really hurt, those more fundamental, more important, this asset of the United States.
Which is happening. So we've seen in the last few days how the Trump administration has been saying sort of a lot of different foreign policy towards Europe and NATO and the Russia-Ukraine war. Has anything changed towards Korea yet?
Now, I think, Korea is in a political turmoil, and obviously, Korea is not really an imminent target, at least in the Trump 2.0. So we have to see. But actually, a lot of business leaders and Korean people are worried about whether they may go through that sort of shock and awe that they experienced in Trump 1.0. But I think that if you look at this medium longer term strategic value, there's a really kind of win-win value proposition between United States and Korea. US is trying to rebuild manufacturing and supply chain, and can't do it alone. And you need partner. But Korea can, offer this really complementary partnership in shipbuilding, defense industry, biopharma, semiconductor, etc. So I think we really have to look at this medium strategic value that this alliance has, and not really kill this momentum with this tariff.
You mentioned shipbuilding. I always think that's really interesting that Korea is really good at it. So can you talk a little bit just about that industry and maybe how this partnership or complementarity with the US could work?
Yeah, I think, shipbuilding, and Korea is a kind of peninsula. So from
you need ships.
Thousands of years ago, you have to build ship, and in our history, this kind of first total ship by General Lee was kind of invented in Korea. I think it's much earlier than in the West. So Korea has this history, but also all these relevant industry. In order to build, shipbuilding, you need, kind of steel industry, machinery, and chemical, and then all this. So I think all these related supply chain really help, kind of build the shipbuilding industry in Korea. And so now I think, Korean companies could consider investing in the United States, but also there needs to be some sort of a deregulation on the US part, because there's a lot of restrictions and requirement that you have to kind of purchase 60-70% of this inputs from the United States. And then also there's a Jones Act, which is very, very restrictive. So I think on the US side, there needs to be some sort of a deregulation effort or modernization of effort on those restrictions. And on the Korean side, they need to be more kind of, proactive in the kind of forging this, supply chain cooperation.
So removing some of those the procurement restrictions like Buy America and lowering those requirements that would benefit Korea, but a lot of Americans would say, oh well, we need stuff to be built in the US.
Yeah.
How would you sort of explain why it's fine that we're buying stuff from Korea?
Yeah, I think a few months ago, the Wall Street Journal reported very interesting, stark contrast between the shipbuilding capacity between United States and China. I think in one shipyard in China, they can build more, the ships than the shipyard combined in the United States since 2014 or so. It shows how much the shipbuilding capacity fell behind in the United States. So I think there can be some sort of kind of middle ground where Korea or Japanese these shipbuilders don't really kind of hurt this domestic kind of manufacturing base, but help with investment and also export import in the shipbuilding industry.
That makes sense to me, but that's why we're here at the Peterson Institute.
Yeah.
So we're almost at the end here. So let's wrap up with what are you going to be looking for next? You said in the next few months, by April-ish, we're going to know what happened with the president in Korea, and also the Trump administration is exactly 1 month old today. What will you be looking for in the next sort of 3 to 6 months, both from Korea domestically as well as the U.S.-Korea relationship?
I feel like it's 1 year, not one month.
It's been a long month.
I think that really, two countries need to have this strategic, geoeconomic, the view of this alliance. On the Korea side, I think first order of business is to put this domestic house in order, and then look to more, kind of medium, longer term strategic value that Korea can bring to the table. As I said, all this manufacturing sector that the United States needs in this shipbuilding, semiconductor, etc. And also, I think on the Korean side, Korea was a big beneficiary of this multilateral trading system. And then right now,
that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, United States and China not really ready to lead again. So I think middle power country or third nations like Korea need to really step up to continue to advance this really important common goods or common challenges that we are facing. On the U.S. side, as I said, they need to look at this Korea in this kind of bigger picture of the geopolitical dynamics happening in the Northeast Asia, and also not to really slow down or disrupt this momentum slowly building between this Korea and the United States with this overdose of tariff.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that works out. I think some of the tariff announcements are going to be coming in the next few weeks, so we'll see how that works. Well, we are at time, Han-koo. Thank you so much for telling us about all of your experiences and everything you've learned. It's very relevant right now, given everything that's happening, and we're grateful that you joined us. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this edition of PIIE Insider Live. What did you think? What do you want to see next? Let us know at meetings@PIIE.com. And if you're not already, subscribe to the PIIE Insider newsletter at PIIE.com/subscribe. So thanks again, and we'll hope you join us next time.